Splatlings have had a weird and honestly rather uneventful history for the most part. Now, this video is not going to focus on all the Splatlings, because Mini and Nautilus were pretty good. Mini was meta towards the end of Splatoon 1, and it was meta for a tiny bit in Splatoon 2, and is still solid today. And anyone playing Splatoon 2 these days knows Nautilus is a pretty common and meta pick for all modes. Now, what we're here to talk about are the anchor or backline Splatlings, which are the Hydra, Ballpoint, and Heavy Splatling. Pretty much every single weapon class in Splatoon 2's history has had a good period of time where it was very strong, but Splatlings are the sole exception, having an incredibly limited amount of time in the spotlight. The only two examples were Heavy during Stingray meta because it was 180p, Sprinkler painted a lot, so it had the fastest ray output of any weapon at the time. And the second example was Ballpoint upon its release for a few patches, mostly because the weapon was incredibly overpowered as it was released later into the game's lifespan. Splatlings have been around for so long now. What's the problem, and what needs to happen for them to be a staple meta pick in Splatoon 3? I'm gonna go over these three weapons and what exactly needs to change, so if you enjoy, subscribe for more, and let's get started with the most basic of all the Splatlings, the Heavies. Heavy was the first Splatling, a very entry-level weapon that has fairly average paint, fairly average mobility, fairly average charge time, fairly average range, etc, etc. None of its stats really stand out, but none of them are bad either, and well, that's basically the reputation of Heavy throughout all of the Splatoon series. Not a bad weapon, but it's not really a good one either. It's just kinda there, your average mid-tier backline. Heavy's biggest problem is nothing to do with the weapon itself, and it's a weakness that's at least somewhat shared with Hydra and Ballpoint, which is it's kind of in the middle of two strong playstyles of backline weapons. Its long distance pressure is just brutally shut down by Charger, having a horrible matchup and absolutely losing in that department. At the same time, its ability to paint and be more aggressive to help its team is absolutely shut down by Jet Squelcher being a much better version of that. Heavy has been trying for years to find a nice, comfortable spot in the middle of those two playstyles, but it just has never hit it. There's two different solutions to these problems that I think they might try in Splatoon 3. The first one being to give it some incredibly new or more drastic buff to give it its own defined niche. And the second of which would be, well, just improving its base stats so it would be a better middle ground between these two options without being better at either category. And right off the bat, I think the idea of giving it something to stand out would be really hard. I mean, look at Splattershot Pro, it has the exact same problems. Not a bad weapon, but its base stats just can't keep up with other options. Even when it got MPU damage up and briefly got its time in the sun, over patches and time people realized, oh wait, there's just better main power-up options in the game. You would have to give Heavy, a basic entry-level weapon, something brand new that's almost entirely exclusive to it, which kind of makes it less of an entry-level weapon and I don't think does its job. So honestly, I think they need to improve its base stats. There's two simple attributes I think they could mess with, and in fact that they already have messed with, which is damage and jump RNG. Now, Heavy used to do 28 damage, then they buffed it to 32, and then later they toned it back to 30 for no reason. And well, I think the devs just aren't really exactly sure how much base damage it should do. I think honestly buffing it to 31 or 32 would be more fair, giving it higher DPS, a bit better fall-off damage, etc. And I mean, Jet Squelcher deals 31 damage, so it should at least be 31, if not 32. Secondly would be the jump spread. Heavy's is not that bad, and I don't think it should have perfect accuracy, but I think they should lower the degree of spread a bit more. I think letting Heavy jump a little bit more could be something that helps it out a lot. Even if it's not the most reliable thing, it just gives it a bit more situational usefulness, so maybe changing the degrees from 3.3 to like 2.5 to where it's a bit significant. This might not be enough for Heavy, it really depends on the power level of things in Splatoon 3 and how the game is, but I think these are nice starts that would give it a better option of competing, especially if it has a kit that stands out from other options. Regardless, I think the best way of fixing Heavy is to continue to just give it some basic stat buffs that don't do too much, but can make it a little bit better, since it is trying to be a bit of a jack of all trades for backline weapons. Honestly, pretty simple and small adjustments, something I could see happening really easily, but I can't say the solution's as easy for Hydra and Ballpoint. While Heavy is a basic jack of all trades weapon, I would argue Hydra is the most glass cannon heavy weapon in all of Splatoon right now. you have an incredibly long charge time with incredibly poor mobility. Losing it for even a little bit means you have to charge the whole thing up again. However, if you get it off, you have incredible range, amazing damage per second, firing for a long period of time, and even that firing mode can paint pretty well. This is the definition of holy crap drastic strengths and holy crap drastic weaknesses. So why doesn't it work? Well, Splatoon 2 is kind of the worst game for Hydra to be in. It's all about mobility and it has a ton of displacement specials. So, you know, you just get in a team fight, you get missiled, you get booyah'd, you get an ink storm, you have to drop your charge, and you can't play the game. It's incredibly difficult to participate in a team fight the second your opponents start playing around their specials whenever they engage. Even chargers don't suffer this much because they only have a short charge time and could get it off quickly. The amount of time you need to charge a Hydra Splatling is so much worse. Splatoon 1 Hydra was a little bit better with the lack of displacement, but it still struggled, and I think Splatoon 3 will have the same thing. Especially with new mobility options, being able to move is still going to be incredibly important, and Hydra is the weapon that would probably benefit from the Squid Roll and Surge the least. I think Hydra's strengths are in a pretty fine spot right now, and it's really hard to adjust that. The DPS and firing range is great, and being countered by stuff like chargers is fair, because I mean, what else are you going to do to rush it down? I think you can't really mess with Hydra's strengths too much. Maybe a bit more damage, but I don't think that would do a lot. It still loses to chargers, and I think in this case it's much more fair. With less specials to counter it, you need something you could run as an option against it, and chargers, or even bows potentially, would be great ways at dealing with it without having to depend on specials as much. That being said, with Whale 5.1 existing and being able to move, and probably at least a few others we haven't seen, I still think Hydra needs some form of adjustments. And because Splatoon 2 made its strengths, such as its damage, and its weaknesses, such as its charge time, more extreme, I think you honestly have to reduce its weaknesses in this case, a very rare thing in terms of balancing glass cannons. I think Splatoon 3 should give it an extremely limited and weak charge hold. So first of all, this would only work while charging the weapon. Once you started firing it, you can't maintain that charge anymore. Secondly, getting both in and out of the charge hold is 3 times longer as other chargers. You wouldn't be able to pop up on someone and start firing, even with a partial charge. But most importantly, this charge would have a decay. As soon as you store it, it would start depleting at around twice the speed of charging it. This means it would only be useful if you had already mostly charged the weapon, and it would only save you a little bit of time. So displacing it would still hit it hard, just not as hard as it does right now. I think this is a fair way to make displacement a little bit weaker against it, while still clearly being a huge problem for the weapon. That might make it a little bit better at standing a chance against other options, particularly at getting a charge after it's been displaced, as it would not take as long. Displacement would still be really good, but you would have a smaller window, meaning you would either have to be faster at denying the Hydra space or killing it, or you would have to use multiple displacement specials to keep it moving for longer. I think this version of Hydra would be much more fair, and while it wouldn't be good anywhere, it would definitely have its niche uses, and there would be a lot more players could do with the weapon without just being shut down. That leaves us with the most complicated and interesting Splatling Splatoon has ever introduced, the Ballpoint. Remember earlier when I mentioned Heavy and I said you could give it entirely new mechanics as a way to make it stand out? Yeah, they did that with Ballpoint. 2 firing modes and the ability to recharge the weapon while you're firing it. Ballpoint was released in an incredibly broken state and got nerfed pretty hard to be toned back, but honestly it still stands out. Arguably part of that could be its kit being the best beacon weapon and really good for aggressive team comps, but I'd argue a good bit of it is also due to the main weapon. It really has that versatility. Even though the long range mode isn't that good, it's still enough to poke at a distance, and you still have a short range mode that can help you from being rushed down, even better than something like a jet squelcher defending itself. I think Ballpoint is probably the most underrated weapon in Splatoon 2, though I do think it has one aspect about it that's a little ridiculous. Why is this thing 220p for Inkstorm? The special that's one of the hardest to get a lot of on a weapon that only paints well in short range. Why? I think this is the one remnant of the Ballpoint is broken era that really doesn't need to be here. Either a little bit of extra long range paint or 200 points for special would be really nice for it. Outside of that though, I think it'll benefit a lot from Splatoon 3 if it's a more aggressive or individual focused game. As long as it has beacon, I can see it being a ton better, since the current meta of Splatoon 2 does make it a little bit harder to do Ballpoint, since playing that hyper aggressive around quick respawn or beacons just isn't as much of a thing. That being said, it's still worth noting just the sheer amount of tools they gave Ballpoint, leading it to being the best of the 3 backline Splatlings. I think all of these 3 Splatlings will be usable in 3, but I also think they have been usable for the entirety of Splatoon 1 and 2's lifespan, and it's about time that Splatlings became a good, staple backline option that you could switch to alongside your chargers or exploshers. Not just something that's there, but something that you actually want to use that has some good strengths that make it much more of a strong option. Let's see it, Splatoon 3.